This podcast is brought to you by CDkeyoffer.com. Use offer code BrokenSilicon to save 25% off all Microsoft software. And then it is also brought to you by the Minis Forum MSA2 compact Zen 5 desktop that even allows for adding a low-profile graphics card. You can also check out that product and support the channel through the link below. And we'll talk about these sponsors more later. But for now, let's get on with the show. And welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom, and today I am joined by a very special guest who's been on, I believe, twice before. This is now the third time, and I love having this guest on because he is one of those guests where we can get into a very nerdy, in-depth technical discussion about upcoming and recently released architectures. But for those who don't know who you are, please introduce yourself. Who are you? Where are you from? And a question I added on is, what drives you to keep making YouTube videos? Because now you've been doing this for years.
So thank you, Tom. Well, my name is Max. I run a YouTube channel called High Yield. Right now, I'm still in Frankfurt, so I'm from Germany. But on Sunday, I'm going to move to Munich. I'm going to move in with my girlfriend.
Oh, so congratulations. I did that last year.
Thank you.
Or
yeah.
Actually a year and a half ago. Can you believe it? But sorry, go on.
I have a lot of packing ahead of me tomorrow, and I'm actually pretty happy to get my mind off moving and talking with you. And what keeps me going? It's always been my passion. It's been my hobby for over 20 years. And even before doing YouTube, I spent a majority of my free time, or maybe not a majority, but the biggest portion of my free time allocated to this thing, just searching, reading things online, spending times in forums, arguing online, the usual stuff you do when you're a nerd and you have access to the internet. And now with YouTube, it's literally a dream come true to some extent, that I can just do what I really love doing and share it with other people. So I'm not planning on stopping.
I know what you mean, and it's interesting because I won't name any names, but I know plenty of YouTubers especially in the tech space from around when I started. I gotta believe it's 6 years ago now. 6 or 7 years ago now, that have burned out, and some of them, I think there were some factors that made them burn out that was different from what I'm about to say, this other one. But some of them, I think, just got bored with some of the info, didn't think the space was as interesting anymore. And I can speak for myself, and it seems like for you as well, that is just not the case. And I worried about that. Would I burn out? Would I get bored after I watched some people I used to know on YouTube get bored of this? And well, we're about to talk about some stuff having to do with Zen 7 and Arrow Lake. There's never been a week, though, where I was bored. There's always something new that's interesting. Maybe that'll change someday, but right? Don't you agree? It's never been more interesting, though, and I think we say that every year we talk.
I think we've actually been spoiled right now. I fully agree. Every year is super interesting, and I mean, I think I'm far away from any burnout, because if you look at my video cadence, I've done 3 videos this year so far, so not that many. There are many more in the pipeline, but I have projects I'm working on at the side, but sometimes it's difficult because I still have a full-time job that I work as my day job, so I need to find time in between. And I think moving in with my girlfriend will help that, because I don't have to travel. And long distance takes up time. So be prepared to see more videos.
Brace yourselves.
Yeah. And I'm also pretty happy that I'm not like a reviewer. I don't have to crunch hardware reviews and tests and all of this. And I can just focus on products. And it doesn't really matter if the product is amazing or not. If it's interesting from a silicon and a chip perspective, I can talk about it. And many products are cool that maybe are not that successful. And it offers me wider range of videos and how I can do my content. So I think I'm pretty lucky.
All right. So I actually want to jump forward here to one of the main subjects. And as I was putting these notes together, something occurred to me. We recorded almost exactly a year ago. That was the last time you were
Mhm.
on.
I remember.
And I remember, of course, if it's middle of 2014, all we were talking about is Zen 5, which I believe was coming out a few months after we re-recorded, and Arrow
Yeah.
Lake a couple months after that. And I remember at a certain point, I believe I was like, well, let's forget rumors. What's your gut tell you? What's your gut tell you is going to happen with Zen 5 versus Arrow Lake? And it's funny because I think Arrow Lake, I think, clearly fell short. I don't think many people expected Arrow Lake's IPC uplift to be lower than Lunar Lake's, especially using TSMC 3 nanometer. But at the same time, man, there were some rumors out there saying 40% IPC increases for Zen 5
Yeah.
didn't come close to that. But at the end of the day, you even if things didn't turn out exactly how we expected them to, and they almost never do, you said your gut was that Zen 5 was going to crush Arrow Lake, and that is absolutely what happened. And so I'm curious, like, looking back on what your expectations were for Zen 5 and Arrow Lake, how do you feel about how it's panned out? And like, how do you feel about being right about Zen 5 beating Arrow Lake, but at the same time, how it did so? Did it still turn out differently than you expected?
I obviously, yeah, it did. Like I'm someone, it's like on one side, I can get pretty hyped really quickly because I
Mhm.
like new
Me too.
technology and I'm thinking about how cool something will be. And if you look at Zen 5 with much wider cores, and at Arrow Lake with Lion Cove and no hyper-threading and a new process node and a new architecture, and someone says 20% more IPC, 40% IPC, I want to believe, like seriously. Of course, I'm also realistic because of like my analysis and my experience. So I don't really expect these huge performance increases, but I expected more for both Zen 5 and Arrow Lake. On seriously, like both, and especially the default versions. Like remember Zen
Mhm.
5%? The first reviews were for gaming. It was basically a draw with Zen 4. And yeah, you offered more, you got more application performance, but it was pretty disappointing from a gaming perspective. And then you had Arrow Lake, which similar to Zen 5 also improved after launch. Intel took longer. And you got better application performance, but you even got a small regression in gaming, which now is like, if you look at the latest reviews, it's like on par with Raptor Lake, like within a few percent. Some games are faster, some games are slower, but it's not a gaming improvement.
And
Um,
comparatively, Zen 5 seems to be aging faster than Zen 4 in gaming. Like I think me and you expected it to.
yeah, yeah. I I think Zen 5 has a lot of raw power, um, and it will age better too than Zen 4. But I
Hmm.
mean, Zen 4 will age better than Zen 3. And something I noticed that many more times right now, I'm still using a 5800X 3D. And like a year back, it was still sometimes beating Zen 4. And now it's usually like in the range, but many more times Zen 4 or Zen 5, even the non X3D variants, are faster because they just have more raw power, even if they lack the extra cache. So,
Hmm. Kira Boom writes in and says, "Hi, I've watched some of High Yield's YouTube videos and found them above my head most of the time, but still fascinating to listen to for details. But anyways, my question, was Zen 5's uninspiring benchmark performance at launch partly due to the memory controller, in your opinion? I watched Level 1 Tech's video showing Windows had issues that Linux didn't, and later on Microsoft cleared those up with patches, but that still didn't provide a magic massive boost to performance like I think we were mostly hoping for. Also, tests and other reviews later between the 9700X and 9800X 3D seems to imply that 3D Vcache is doing a lot of the heavy lifting of providing a buffer to make up for bad system memory access. Would AMD have been better off designing a new I/O chiplet with a better memory controller for Zen 5? Could you see a chunk of Zen 6's performance uplift versus Zen 5 in reviews just being the fact that Zen 6 will use a new memory controller?
so if I want to answer that in one word, yes. I'm I'm pretty sure the memory controller, like it's the same I/O die they used on Zen 4. It's definitely not a bad I/O die, but AMD had to decide what they're scaling up, and they probably don't have the resources, or it's it's like you have to think what you're focusing on. Are you putting more resources on the next generation? How you're scaling your product lineup? And they just focused on the CCDs, and they focused on the new 3D cache, which they switched underneath, and it took the same IO die. And obviously, if they would have spent the engineering time to design a new IO die, it probably would have helped the performance of Zen 5. And you can see that, like, it's multiple things. First of all, they're still using the same fundamental chiplet architecture they introduced with Zen 2. Zen 2, Zen 3, Zen 4, Zen 5. It's still Infinity Fabric over package. It's improved. They've improved the routing. They improved how it works. It's better now than it was before, but it's the same fundamental approach. And if you have a Zen 5 with only one CCD, the CCD isn't even able to use the full memory bandwidth because you don't have all the interconnects that you would need. Like, you need a dual Zen 5 CCD CPU to use the full memory bandwidth. It was like this on previous generations too. So yeah, for sure. And Zen 5 X3D shows that, because the 9800 X3D, and I feel like that was a turning point, because the public opinion was like Zen 5%. It's not a good generation. It doesn't really do anything. And then you got the 9800 X3D reviews, and suddenly everyone was like, "Oh my God, Zen 5 is amazing." And that's when I noticed that the idea of a Halo product can have a really big impact on general, like on the general population, how they think about a product. That's why it's so important.
Yeah, I have two things. Number one, with the memory controller. In hindsight, I really don't remember exactly what went wrong there, because I do remember in very early Zen 5 info I had, they were like, "Oh, the memory controller is going to be better. It's going to be great." And then I remember at some leak at some point I put out, I think before or after the launch, they said that they basically had to redesign Zen 6's memory controller from the ground up after how Zen 5 turned out. So I'm not sure what that exactly means. I probably should ask more questions about that, because what it sounds like to me is maybe they did have some other memory controller and it didn't go well, and they had to reuse the same one, or maybe they had an option for a better one, because otherwise I don't know why they would have to reuse the Zen 6 one unless they just learned that Zen 5 has way more weaknesses with the old memory controller than they expected. I guess that's probably what it is. And I think were they to have a better one, it would have turned out a lot better. And in fact, actually, I don't know if you've seen this, is something I keep bringing up. There were some, I think it was Geekbench, Strix Halo benchmarks that showed massively higher performance in a Geek benchmark for Strix Halo and its memory controller, and the new way that they interface the chiplets, which is a new way, versus the Zen 5 variant. And you have to wonder, like, if there was some version of that memory controller they were planning for Zen 5 that got scrapped and came out a year later for Strix Halo, or if they learned something and that's why Strix Halo was delayed too and it got a much better one.
Yeah.
Probably that, actually. But it's very clear that something was fixed in Strix Halo's version, right?
I mean, 6 Halo has not only the new IO die with the new memory controller, it's probably like a special design, and they take all the learnings from previous iterations and improve on them. But I mean, you also have the interconnect, which allows for lower latency, higher bandwidth. I think Strix Halo can use all the bandwidth from the memory, even if you would have just one chiplet, probably. And this, they call it Sea of Wires, which is probably like a version of info, like a fan out interconnect. It's actually something I want to get my hands on, but right now they're pretty expensive. I mean, if you look at the framework, they sold out in like minutes, and you can get the first variants in Q3. But I think Strix Halo right now this year is one of my top contenders for most interesting chip with the new interconnect. And I think we would be able to learn a lot of how Zen 6 will actually look like. Just one more addition to the Zen 5 memory controller, or the reused IO die. I mean, Zen 2 and Zen 3 both use the same IO die. And the same is true now for Zen 4 and Zen 5. So I'm pretty sure that that was planned. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
of course, there's always things changing, and the engineers are working on new stuff. So plans can change, and they change a lot of times. But I feel like from AMD's point of view and how they operated, I'm pretty sure that when they designed Zen 5 or when they started to work on Zen 5, their initial idea was probably to reuse the Zen 4 IO die, and that's what we saw.
Yeah, I should correct myself on that too. I kind of guessed a couple things in front of you, and then landed kind of where you're going with it. But yeah, I think they did. And my suspicion is they discovered much more weaknesses by reusing the IO die than they expected to find. And that's why they had to redesign the Zen 6 memory controller. But speaking of Zen 6, obviously a lot of this depends on when Intel will be competing with them, if AMD feels like they need to rush some new product out. And actually, you could argue maybe it doesn't matter if AMD launches their non-Halo products first, because Zen 5 turned out okay at the end of the day. But I have to say, like, at a minimum, I'm guessing this is something I've said ever since the launch, but it's the first time you've been on since then, so I have to ask your opinion too. I think even if they didn't have the 9800X 3D ready for release in August or something, and let's be clear, I think the Zen 5 release should have been pushed back at least a month. I think if they would have just announced it and told you the price, like from the beginning, whatever it was, I think 600 for the 16 core or 500 for the 12 core, or was it 550? I think it was 500.
Yeah.
And then whatever, like 329, whatever 350, 329, whatever it was for the 9700X. Even if you couldn't buy the 9800X 3D yet, if they would have said it's going to be $479, it launches in 3 months, every review for Zen 5 would have been, well, it's not much faster in gaming, but it is 20% faster in applications. And remember, this isn't the gaming chip. If we knew when the X30 was coming out and the price of it ahead of time, I think every review would have been less critical, don't you think?
Probably, but at the same time, I think it's always a bad strategy if you're launching a new product and you say, well, wait a little bit, in 3 months, the really good product will launch. I think you're kind of raining on your own parade. And
traditionally, I agree, but no one bought Zen 5 until the X3D chip came out anyways, right? So I think that is what AMD thought, and that is what I would have said a couple of years ago. But I think, at least my opinion here, I'm sitting here going, I think maybe we've learned consumers know there's always going to be an X3D chip, and they will not buy any of them until they know what options they have. I mean, you even see a similar thing with graphics cards where you see people say, well, I'm not getting this Nvidia or AMD card until I see the competition come out. And it's the same thing. AMD is competing with themselves. They might not get the X3D chip, but they want to know what the options are. And so I think with Zen 6, it would behoove AMD, unless, of course, it's just 1,000 times faster and it doesn't matter, that they should just tell you ahead of time, by the way, X3D is coming. It'll be this much better. So if you want to save money and get the weaker one now, you can. If you don't, this is when it's all coming out.
I'm always wondering, when we look at like the release strategies of companies like AMD and Intel and Nvidia, I mean, someone somewhere makes a decision on when they want to launch, but there's many other factors impacting that decision, like supply chains, if you find a bug or not, how quickly the drivers mature, and all of these different things. And I mean, if you look at it from AMD's perspective, the best way would be to launch the 9800X3D, and the reviews are, wow, oh my God, that's the fastest chip. It's so amazing. Zen 5 is just killing it. And then you launch the other versions, and the people who cannot afford the high-end product, the Halo products, they're going to be like, okay, Zen 5, it's a great architecture. I've read good reviews on it. I'm just going to buy the little slower one, like the one with the lower number, but it's still a Zen 5. And that would probably, especially if you look at like consumers DIY market, probably the best way to launch it. But I'm pretty sure AMD knows a lot more about how they're selling their CPUs, when they're selling the CPUs. So
do they? They make a lot of mistakes. I don't know. See, I would say that of Nvidia, but even now I would say to Nvidia, I don't know. They're making a lot of mistakes.
Don't even talk about it. I wanted to.
We're going to have to eventually, even though it's going to feel like pulling teeth out. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. I think in hindsight, though, we can say AMD probably launched Zen 5 way too soon because they thought they had to get to market before Arrow Lake.
Yeah.
Arrow Lake didn't turn out. Had AMD known that Arrow Lake wasn't going to be very impressive, they probably would have just launched them all at the same time in like October or November, right?
Yeah, maybe. And the same for Intel. Like they could have waited. Like it was obvious that with all the updates to the firmware and the chipset drivers and whatnot, you could see like a steady improvement. It wasn't like huge steps. It wasn't like Arrow Lake suddenly becoming like this shiny Halo product. But the Arrow Lake you can buy right now is a considerably better product. Like it's something that if you're looking for like a good value, the what is it, 265K? Is it like the new
That's the
Core
i7,
5? That's the
Ultra
i7.
7.
The 5, like there's the 285K is the 7 or the 9, and then there's the
8.5 is the Ultra 9,
yeah, yeah.
6.5 is 7, they moved it, right?
Yeah.
And then 245, I believe, is the Core Ultra 5.
Yeah. The 265K right now is like 300 euros here in Germany. I think it's below $300 in the US. And you get a lot of application performance, more than you get with comparable AMD CPUs. And honestly, yes, it's maybe a tie with Raptor Lake on gaming, but Raptor Lake is good at gaming. It's like if you have a 13600K in your rig, you're not going to upgrade. You're not being bottlenecked if you're not using a 5090 or 1080p or something. So you get more than enough gaming performance. You get a lot of application performance, and for very little price, for a very low price. So it's actually right now it's like a good budget offering.
Well, let's move on to Arrow Lake, though. Carbon Cry writes, and it says, sorry, I haven't found the time to watch your analysis of the Arrow Lake die yet, but I have to ask, based on what you've seen, does Intel's decision to cut SMT pay off in significant area savings?
Yeah, I think he asked me that too on Discord. And I tried to measure it. Like I did a really deep analysis of the core itself of Lion Cove, and I was actually stuck at this for like 10 days, and I was lucky and I got in contact with Nemes I'm pretty sure you've seen him on Twitter, and we went to the course together, and we figured out some things, some interesting parts that like because Intel had to use TSMC's standard cells, which really changed up some areas of the design, which really like tripped me when I was counting like how much cache there is. For example, I was counting the cache, the L2 cache of a Lion Cove on Arrow Lake, and I knew it's 3 megabytes, but I was always counting more. And until we realized, okay, the implementation Intel is doing, there's an extra row for ECC, because you need like the redundant ECC. You need that in the cache. It's not only the memory, you have it down the cache. But usually the extra bit you need for ECC is already implemented in the standard cell. So basically it looks like 3 megabytes, but has ECC included. But in this version, there was more than 3 megabytes. And we looked at the individual areas, and I also measured them. But because it's a new design and it's on a new process node, and not only a new process node, but on a process node from TSMC, I cannot I cannot say if there's any area improvements or by removing hyperthreading, because I'm lacking like I would have asked, I would need to ask an Intel engineer, and I'm not comfortable. Like it would be a pure guess.
Yeah, the best explanation I've gotten from people at Intel as to why Arrow Lake performs the way it does is that whatever they tried to do with Meteor Lake didn't really pan out. Like the cores themselves are fine, the architectures themselves are fine, but the Meteor Lake platform itself seems to not have scaled performance across the tiles as well as they were expecting. And for anyone listening to this, just so everyone knows, Arrow Lake uses the exact same platform as Meteor Lake. In fact, there was a desktop Meteor Lake planned that was canceled, but the desktop Arrow Lake you can see with like up to 24 cores, that is the canceled Meteor Lake desktop platform. That's why there's a dummy die in there, I believe, or something to fill in extra space that they don't have now
Yeah.
that they're using smaller nodes with Arrow Lake versus Meteor Lake's Intel 4 node for the cores. So and that's the problem with Arrow Lake. And the problem with any Arrow Lake refresh is, and I got to wonder, like, is there not an aggressiveness there or a drive? Like, they need to start over as soon as possible then, because they are stuck with these performance hits that makes Lion Cove and Arrow Lake perform worse per clock than Lunar Lake, that are just there until they move to the next platform with Panther Lake or Nova Lake, whichever one they put on desktop first.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the Arab Lake platform, and especially like the IO, like the smaller IO tile is exactly one-on-one. It's the same one used on Meteor Lake. The other chiplets are different, but the IO tile is the exact same. There's a couple of things I think is really interesting about Arrow Lake. There's some of the IP they use in Arrow Lake is like a little bit behind Lunar Lake. Like on Lunar Lake, you have the new XE2 Battle Mage iGPU. You have the new NPU 4, like the fourth version of Intel's NPU. On Arrow Lake, you have Alchemist XE.
But it's like an Alchemist plus. It's like better than the previous Alchemist.
Yeah,
but it's not Battle Mage. It's really weird.
But it's not Alchemist with XMX. So there's also an Alchemist with XMX. I think that's used on the Arrow Lake H or like the mobile versions. But this one doesn't have the extra XMX function. They also use the NPU 3 instead of the new NPU 4. But then they have, of course, the newest cores with Skymont and Lion Cove on N3B. And of course, the iGPU doesn't really play that much of a role in a desktop CPU like Arrow Lake, because you probably have a dedicated GPU anyways. And the NPU, I mean, right now, AMD doesn't even have an NPU in their desktop CPUs, right? Zen 5 doesn't, like, this is the same IO die, there's no NPU in there. And the NPU, I'm not a guy who's like, okay, there's some people who say that any silicon or any area spent on an NPU is wasted in a desktop part. I don't think so. I think, for example, if you use like simple things like a background blur on your Teams call or whatever,
and if it only takes like 5% of the die to do that type of stuff, I agree. I don't see that as a big deal. But the second you take up more than that, you know.
But things like this, it's really cool because it doesn't use it doesn't take anything away from the CPU cores. It doesn't use a lot of energy. And these are things that many people use on a daily basis. Like if you have Teams for work and you're always scared by the call, by the sound, because it's horrible, keeps you up at night, that's something you can use it for. One more interesting thing I found is if you look at Arrow Lake at the die shots and you can count the PCI Express lanes, you can count the physical layers, like how many PCI Express PHYs there are. There's 16 PCI Express 5.0 PHYs on the SoC tile. That's probably used for the GPU most of the time. Like this is a GPU connection, 16 lanes. And then there's additional 8 PCI Express 5.0 PHYs on the IO tile. So in total, Arrow Lake has 24. But as far as I know, there's only 20 of them usable, which is interesting because Intel could offer you can connect your GPU with 16 times PCI Express Gen 5, and you can also add 2 Gen 5 SSDs at full X4 speeds. But for some reason,
there's something in my head telling me I've talked to someone about this at some point years ago, like that it might offer more, and that like last minute I was told, oh, it turns out it's not going to offer it. I don't know what it was with signal integrity or what, but I believe there was some plan early on to do that. But I guess that's what I'm getting to is I wonder what you just think overall with like, are you too depressed to go outside because of how expensive Microsoft software is? Well, there's absolutely no need for that. Just go to CDkeyoffer.com. That's right. This piece of content is once again sponsored by CDkeyoffer.com. And I say once again because they've been a fantastic sponsor of Moore's Law is Dead and its community for many years. And that's because they always deliver the best pricing reliably for Microsoft products like Windows operating systems, Office software, and they also sell games and other things as well. So make sure you check them out, especially during their Easter sale going on right now. And if you do, use offer code BrokenSilicon to save 25% on all Microsoft software, and then Die Shrink to save 3% off on everything else on the website. The community uses them. I use them for my new Zen 4 X3D desktop. And Jesse here needs to stop moping around, and I think use them as well. So that's, once again, support Moore's Law is Dead by going to CDkeyoffer.com through the links below today. It's okay, Jesse. It's okay. What's going on with Intel's design teams? Like, this is making me realize just how odd this is. Like you said, we have Alchemist in Arrow Lake on desktop, but on mobile, it's Alchemist plus plus without XMX.
Yeah.
We have this old NPU, not the new NPU. For some reason, we're having dummy dies because we didn't design this to fit. But it's very like it to me. Like, when you look at AMD, I mean, sure, they'll reuse the IO die, but like we discussed, they plan to from the start, and that was just cost savings. They didn't think it mattered. But there seems to be so many things with Intel where, like, I swear some of the design teams are like on cruise control. Like, I know there's one team that works on the whole overall package that designed it for Meteor Lake and Air Lake, and then there's another team that designed Lion Cove. I knew some people who worked on that. And they don't talk to each other. And then you get into this situation where you're using outdated NPUs and Alchemist. And I wonder, like, I don't even know if I have a question. I just, like, what's your reaction to, do you agree? Like, it really seems like AMD has a top down, we know what we're doing, and Intel just has 5 different teams working on stuff, and then they throw it together, and then they're like, uh-oh. It reminds me of, I bring this example of a lot, like, before Sony had to, like, massively downsize, like, after the PS3 didn't do so well, at first at least, that an example given by a later CEO on, like, why they had to kill off some of their teams. They had 2 different teams at Sony launch competing tablets in the same month, and that wasn't intentional. 2 different designs for ARM tablets, and they didn't know they were making the same thing competing with each other. It feels like that with Intel, except they throw all these products with tiles together, and they didn't know what everyone was working on.
Yeah, I think, I mean, Intel is a really, really big company. And in my experience, and I mean, in my day job, I'm a business consultant. In my experience is that any big company at some point becomes inefficient because there's, like, too many people. A lot of people are not talking with each other in an efficient way, just like in your example. If you're at a certain point, it's difficult to make decisions because no one wants to make decisions anymore. And I think it's also, and I don't really like that to use that word, but it's also like the company, how you call it, like a company spirit, or like how the company feels. And for
like
me,
a work culture.
Yeah, like the company culture. That's the word I was looking for. Yeah. And, like, I'm not, like, I had to watch, like, company culture videos at previous jobs, and I'm always like, why do I have to watch that? And most of the time I think it's these videos don't really help anything. But AMD basically was the underdog, and they came back from the dead, almost bankrupt, and they just started to perform. And I think you can feel that in a company when you're on an upwards track, when you're doing well, when you're improving. And with Intel, it's not only that they're a big company, they also have a lot of uncertainty with, like, splitting parts and new CEO here, new CEO there, changing strategies. And then at the same time, their products are, like, they're not bad. They're not bad, but they're not dominating like they did like, I always want to say the past 10 years, but Zen released, like, 7 8
We're in a
years
new
ago.
era now.
Yeah, we're already in a new era. I think it's a combination of many things because they're really, really smart people at Intel. They're amazing engineers. And I think Lion Cove is a great architecture, and especially Lunar Lake is a great product, but we don't see that much of Lunar Lake, interestingly. It's like, I would have, if you just think a few years back, even when AMD was still performing well and increasing their market share, especially in mobile, Intel was just dominating because all the OEMs just pushed out like 100 different laptops with all the Intel mobile chips. But now with Lunar Lake, it's like they have a really, really good competitive chip that if I'm not buying an Apple, if I'm not buying an Apple laptop, if I'm in the market for Windows laptop, and I'm looking for something portable, not a workstation, I would buy
Mhm.
a Lunar Lake, 100%. It's really interesting. It's really fast. It's really efficient. It has all the new bells and whistles, and I feel like I'm not seeing that many SKUs hit the market. And I think it's a combination of big company, uncertain times, and it takes a new direction, and maybe the new CEO can improve that and basically bring the company together on a shared vision where everyone's like, okay, we can actually take back control. I think that's the biggest challenge. LBT
Yeah.
is first, yeah,
When it comes to Lunar Lake, the impression that I get is two things. Intel has bet the farm on two things for their CPUs in the past few years. Number one is AI is everywhere. That thing Pat wouldn't stop saying.
yeah,
And what we've seen so far, and this has come out in recent earnings from Intel, and I can back this up with talking to people in retail as well, is that no one's going into Best Buy, and asking for AI. No one's going in and going, which laptop's the best at AI? No one
yeah.
asks that. And that's the only reason you would get Meteor Lake. Meteor Lake isn't even really more efficient than Raptor Lake at certain power consumption levels. The reason you would get Meteor Lake is AI, and no one wants that. And that's partially true of Lunar Lake as well. But then on top of that, the other thing Intel's bet the farm on is E-cores. No one goes in and says, what has the most cores? They say, I want 8 big cores. And I think were Lunar Lake to have had just 8 P cores, it would probably be selling vastly better. But the problem is people go in and then they see 4 big, 4 little, and they're like, this is a quad core, and it isn't. And its 4 little cores are what? I mean, basically as good as, better than, it depends how you look at it, better than Zen 3 in single threading, maybe the similar in multi-threading. But like, I think that's the problem with Lunar Lake, is it costs more than the competition, and the things that makes it cost more, no one's asking for.
Lunar Lake is also the one chip where I'm questioning why it is a chiplet or like a tile-based architecture. Because yes, the idea makes sense. You have the compute tile with all the important parts of like the GPU and the CPU cores and the memory controller and the NPU. It's almost like monolithic if you look at
Mm-hmm.
it from that point of view. But the IO tile is so tiny. I wonder if you would
Yeah,
have
you're right.
added the IO to the compute tile with one monolithic chip, you could have get rid of the interposer, not use followers for the die-to-die interconnect. Maybe it would have been even cheaper. It's
And
just
and am I wrong? Lunar Lake doesn't share any chiplets with Arrow Lake. So were it to
no.
share an IO tile with Arrow Lake, you might
Yeah,
go, oh, that makes sense, but it
yeah.
doesn't.
No, it doesn't. No, no. And Foveros is a really, really interesting technology, and I mean that's something Intel also focused on their last. How was it called? Architecture or Foundry direct. Like
Mm-hmm.
last week or 2 weeks ago, they had like this keynote where they talked about packaging and foundry, and there's a lot of demand. Yeah, I mean we can see that with TSMC and CoWoS, and Intel has a really good technology. They have EMIB, they have Foveros, and if they can use that and benefit from that, that's something I hope that turns out well because we need more competition and more capacity in the market.
And yeah, when it comes to the chiplets, again, this is a spiel I've done many times. So I wonder if you agree. Like, it just to me feels like Intel saw AMD use chiplets, and then they said we need to use chiplets. Kind of like, I don't know, a decade ago, people saw Tesla and said they make electric cars. We need to make electric cars. No, you don't. Only if your electric cars are good. You don't want to use electric just to use electric. You want to make a good product. And at AMD, we can see it's just fascinating. I remember I did a video years ago where I added it up, and it's like AMD made 4 chiplets and then 6 products from it.
Yeah,
Intel made 10 chiplets and like 3 products from those 10 chips. It's like AMD is using chiplets to save money. That's why. And they still do plenty of monolithic stuff. More monolithic stuff, it seems now, actually, than Intel does, right? I mean, Strix is monolithic. Lunar Lake isn't.
yeah.
And it seems like Intel just thinks they have to use chiplets, or maybe to make their PowerPoints pretty. I don't know. But I'm wondering what you think, because it's still, I think they might learn this lesson because you're seeing them use less and less chiplets. Like Granite Rapids is like, what, 3 or something instead of 4 for Sapphire. But an Emerald went to 2, I believe. So I think they're getting that you shouldn't just use chiplets to use chiplets. But I don't know. Do you agree that it seems like they just did because they could?
It's definitely a vastly different approach. I mean, as you said, AMD did it out of necessity because they were the underdog. They didn't have the resources, and they used the lowest tech chiplet implementation you can do. Just basically, it's not using advanced packaging if you disregard the X3D chips. Zen 5, like a 9950X, is using standard packaging. There's no advanced packaging there at all. And AMD just scales up from a small range of chiplets and just combines them to produce multiple SKUs. And Intel's tile approach is just, they just jumped from monolithic chips to a silicon interposer, which is probably the most costly version of chiplets of tiles right now. You have to have the interposer. You need your advanced packaging, and yeah, the really strange part is that they're not using that added flexibility, because that's the main part, that you're flexible. You could basically switch out the compute tile of Arrow Lake for the next generation and just
Mm-hmm.
be quicker to market. Be like, okay, we've got a good memory controller, and Arrow Lake has a really good memory controller. It can run at really high speeds. It supports CU DIMM. Like, the memory controller on Arrow Lake is really great. We can update the architecture, maybe the IP in the GPU, but you don't really need to. Alchemist is good for even the next generation if it's not your main GPU. So you can add all these things, and I would take Arrow Lake and just use a new and improved compute tile, just add it into the mix, and try to get my new technology to the market quicker. And I feel like Intel is not really taking advantage of
Mm.
what they created, because I would have released Meteor Lake and then quickly Arrow Lake, and now I'm just focusing on just a compute tile. Just switch out a compute tile.
Yeah, I remember the original plan was an 8 plus 32 core compute tile. And then that sounded canceled. I know there's rumors coming out. Maybe it's not canceled. I guess we'll see. But then I remember hearing, oh, actually, what they might do is accelerate a desktop Panther Lake compute tile that just drops into the same. And I was like, awesome. I don't want Arrow Lake again. Give me Panther Lake. That sounds
Yeah.
great. But then I heard that might be canceled. So I don't know if they're going to do that. But if they do, and especially when it pertains to mobile, which I believe is a new platform, Chris Rich writes in and says, what parts of the Arrow Lake design do you think most need fixing for Panther Lake?
That's a good question. I think if you look at the gaming performance, where right now it's a tie with Raptor Lake, but it's not really an improvement. There's no real generational gaming uplift. There's definitely a generational improvement in efficiency, because you get the similar same gaming performance at a much lower power draw. But the gaming's performance, I think, is not because of the tiles. The bandwidth, like, there's like a really good article by Chips and Cheese where they tested like latency and bandwidth. And yes, of course, it does add a little bit of bandwidth. The forest interconnects, you have to go from the compute tile to the SoC tile. It's not helping, but it's not really that detrimental. I think, and that's just honestly, I'm not an architecture person. It's a little bit uneducated guess, or a little bit educated guess, however you want to take it. But Intel has gone really, really big on cache. You have 3 megabytes L2 cache on a Lion Cove Core and Arrow Lake. Zen 5 still has 1 megabyte. They added another cache level. They call the L1 cache now L0 cache, and they call the new cache L1 cache. They have a 192 kilobyte L1 cache. They have like an extra L0 cache, and every cache level adds more latency, and the bigger caches are slower. Yes, of course, you have the advantage of having more data in cache, and if you have a cache hit, that's amazing. But if you don't, and you have more levels and slower caches, just the whole access just takes a hit. It just takes more time. And if you look at gaming, which is really, really memory latency dependent, just a little bit of extra latency in the cache system just cancels out all the architectural improvements in the course itself, like faster integer, faster floating point, or better out of order scheduling, or better branch prediction. Lion Cove is better, like from a pure core execution part. It's definitely better than Raptor Cove, but all the added latency and all the changes to the cache hierarchy and cache sizes, I think that's what's really limiting the gaming performance. Because if it had like a really fast cache levels set up for gaming, I think it could definitely be like 10% faster in gaming.
I think that's the rumor too for how much faster Panther Lake may be. I mean, so you're basically saying fundamentally Arrow Lake on paper should be good, but they probably just need to redo how the cache works.
Yeah, it's like it's better, and you can see that in the single core performance. It's faster than Zen 5, not by much, but it's faster than single core. It's has really, really good application performance. But this performance uplift is kind of offset by in gaming tasks, in games, because of the changes in the caches and maybe a little bit due to the tile-based design. And in the end, the added performance is offset and you come out basically on the same level as Raptor Cove.
Mm-hmm. All right. Dark Side of the Force writes in and says, have you seen any details on Nova Lake Desktop that to you would justify a new socket, especially because the rumor is that it's only going to be around 100 more pins over the current LGA 1851. Yeah, I forgot what it was. It's like 1940 something. I forgot.
1954 or 40. Yeah, something.
I think you're right. I think it's 1954. He said, would it be a big mistake for Intel to require a new socket for Nova Lake? And do you think Nova Lake should need another 100 pins?
Yes, I think it's a big mistake, or a big mistake. I think it's a mistake. I've heard the rumors too that there's a new socket and basically we will only get one generation, or maybe there's an Arrow Lake refresh, but
maybe, yeah.
In general, one, like, I don't know. I don't have the information. If that's true, I think it's gonna hurt Intel more than they think it will, because AIM-4 turned out to be this legendary socket with support for so many years. I know so many people on AIM-4. I'm still on AIM-4. And AIM-5 is starting out to look similar. Like you have Zen 4, you have Zen 5, and you probably have Zen 6.
You'll have Zen 6.
Yeah, you will have Zen 6. So people are, even if people are just buying a mainboard and a new CPU and they're just using that until they upgrade to a new socket, the idea of being able to upgrade to have more, like much more longevity and more support in the future, it's definitely adding to the buying decision. And Intel always had this like 2 generations on one socket, which was always pretty lackluster. And if they go down to 1 generation, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't planned, that was not planned. They wanted to support it.
No, they wanted Meteor Lake and then Arrow Lake and then Arrow Lake refresh on the same socket. Yeah. That was the original plan.
But it didn't work out that. And if it really turns out like a 1 generation socket, I think people will think of Intel as like a 1 generation socket company. And I don't think that's what Intel wants. But if it's that way, they're not even using all the pins on the socket 1800. I think it's a similar pin size than compared to AIM-5. And I'm not an engineer. I'm not a socket engineer, so I don't really know which decisions go into when you switch the socket. Of course, if you need more pins because you're upgrading to a new memory standard, or you're adding a lot more I/O or more power delivery, there's plenty of different considerations. Maybe you need a bigger socket because you're using more chiplets and you're spreading them out further. So there's many things playing into that. But I would really like to know why, if Intel is doing that, why they need to upgrade the socket right now. Why they cannot put Nova Lake on socket 1851, is it right?
Yeah, and I should look through my notes and see when Nova Lake plans to come out as well. But I think you touched on something there of like, why do you need it? Because I don't know if you remember this, but after Zen 3 came out, in the presentation, AMD said they consider going to a new socket for Zen 3, and it actually took quite a bit of work to make it fit with the pin layout of AM4, but they decided midway through development, it's worth it. It'll win people over. And it's odd that we never see Intel make that decision ever. I mean, even there were 2 sockets for Coffee Lake, right? I mean, they couldn't even let you have all of Coffee Lake on one socket. And again, I don't know why. It's like they just don't learn from their past mistakes. And I think depending on when Arrow Lake comes out, Nova Lake comes out, they better watch out here because I know that Zen 6 is on AM5. It's going to be a massive uplift. And I've even heard rumors that like Zen 7 could have a variant on AM5, although I wouldn't bet on that one. But
Yeah.
I've heard there might be like an AM5 plus bridge socket. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But the fact that AMD is considering that, what's going to happen is Intel's going to say, you need this new platform, and AMD is going to say, nope, just buy 24 core Zen 6 or whatever, how many cores Zen 7 ends up being, and then you don't need to buy a new motherboard. And we already had that issue with Arrow Lake. I think it's going to be twice as bad when you consider right? Because if you think about it, a lot of people didn't buy Zen 4. And so it didn't really matter that Zen 5 was on the same socket because they were going to have to buy AM5 anyways. I would have been one of those people included in that. But once you get to Zen 6 and Zen 7, there's a lot of people that got Zen 4, Zen 5, and Zen 6, or Zen 5X3D, I should say. And multiple generations of people are already owning AM5 and going to be happy to upgrade without buying a new motherboard. I think it's going to be twice as big of a problem as it was for Arrow Lake.
Yeah. For the reasons, obviously, back in the day when Intel was dominating and AMD couldn't compete, the reasons to switch the socket every 2 generations was so the board partners could sell new motherboards and you could sell new chipsets and people were buying more stuff. So it was like a pure business decision. And it's really difficult to change from the learned behavior, basically, how I would call it. And a company kind of learns that if they work like that. And Socket 1700, we had Alder Lake, which was a good generation. It was a success for Intel. Raptor Lake, which was also a good competitive generation. Raptor Lake Refresh, which, it's a refresh. But it was Socket 1700 was a good socket. It was nothing special, nothing like AIM4 with super long support. But I think it worked well. And they planned more for 1851. And I think if they're actually gonna switch, they should have tried to add more for 1851. I think if they're really gonna drop it, maybe after Arrow Lake Refresh, I think that's not gonna be good for their perception, especially in the DIY market. But I'm pretty sure the decision has been made. We're so far.
If these rumors are coming out.
If the rumors are true, then we have to wait. But I think it's looking like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm looking at my notes now, and I think Intel may have recently said this publicly, but like Nova Lake is planning to come out, I believe, late 2026, and so that will be right up against Zen 6, and I don't know. There's gonna be all these Zen 4 and Zen 5 people looking to upgrade, but anyway, speaking of future AMD architectures, we got to get to I think the most exciting thing I wanted to talk to you about today. Before we started recording, just so everybody knows, I sent Max some future Zen documents because the leak I am working on is mostly done, but it's not quite done. I haven't dotted all the I's. I haven't decided everything I'm going to release quite yet. But it occurred to me, a Moore's Law said team member said, High Yield is like one of the best people to talk about the stuff you're learning about Zen 7, right? So maybe you should show them it. And so just full disclosure, we're going to talk kind of at a more higher level here, but I have sent some of the stuff that I have to Max ahead of time so that we could discuss this. And the way I would summarize what I think the big takeaways are from what AMD is doing with Zen 7 and probably Zen 8 as well is they are moving towards a lot of official different variants. I guess I won't show this slide in this leak today, but I will say they're planning dense cores, classic cores, obviously, low power cores, which I've already leaked for Zen 6, efficiency cores, and then there's a new 3D core as well. So no E-cores. AMD is doubling down on one architecture. They turn into 5 different things or more. And they're also going to keep using whatever the newest node is when things come out. Wow, are they spending for the best stuff? And also 3D cores, which I'll have Gerard, the editor, throw up a teaser of 3D cores. This is not Vcache cores. Zen 7 is going to usher in, and I wouldn't be surprised if there was some version of Zen 6 that does this, but at a minimum, Zen 7 ushers in new 3D cores that require cache chiplets, not Vcache, full cache chiplets with the cores on top of it. And as you'll see later this week, everybody listening, this seems to be leading to some profound performance up increases. So I wonder what you think about that, Max, like AMD moving to all of these variants, bleeding edge nodes, and to architectures that I think we've talked about forever, finally cores that require 3D stacking and moving the cache very close because it's right underneath it.
I mean, it's the logical next step. I honestly didn't expect it so soon, but I'm not sure if so soon is the right word, because Zen 7 and beyond is still like, we're still waiting for Zen 6.
Mhm.
So I'm still in my head in the first chiplet generation. I feel this would be probably the first native chiplet generation where you have to use it. You can kind of say it about Intel's design too, because they pulled apart their IP so much that you have to use a interposer, but it's like a passive interposer. It's just for interconnecting the tiles. And with this approach, with these 3D cores, AMD would actually have like a native chiplet design that needs to be active die on active die to properly function, which is really cool to think about. Like we're moving fast.
Yeah, I think, and I'm always someone, people say I overhype things, but I think this is about when I expected it. I was kind of hoping, God, I remember someone telling me years ago, like Zen, like they were trying to get Vcache working since Zen 2. AMD said publicly that they had variants of Zen 2 that used it, but it wasn't quite ready. Zen 3, they weren't sure if they would have it ready, but they were near the end of the gen, so they released it. I was going to say for fun. It wasn't for fun, but like they released one chip to like make a big splash. And Zen 4 was the first architecture designed knowing they would have Vcache ready by then, which is why I think you see the 7800X 3D get to better clock speeds, and you see Zen 5 with it in mind. I was always told like Zen 6 or the one after that is the one where they're going to design the architecture with the mindset that there will be Vcache. And so I think it's about the right time though, Zen 7, which will be late 27 or early 28, I think. And yeah, I don't know what else to say, except that I guess as a teaser, I'll tell people like the performance increases for gaming is going to be probably absurdly high, don't you think?
If you look at the amount of cache that you can stack on a single chip, if you really separate the cache, the L3 cache from the cores, you could get to insane levels. I'm pretty sure at a certain point you have like diminishing returns, because if you would have like a terabyte of cache, you probably won't have more performance than you would have like a gigabyte of cache. I'm pretty sure that's everyone would agree on that. So at some level, more cache doesn't really add more gaming's performance, but we're not there yet. Like even with Zen 5 X3D and probably Zen 6 X3D, we're probably not there yet. So there's still headroom. And if you have just this massive amount of like layer of cache where you can fit in all the gaming data and have like really low latency access to that, gaming performance, if that turns out to be the way AMD implements this, gaming performance should see a massive uplift from that. Yeah. And efficiency, because every hit you have in cache, you don't need to go out to the memory, and you save energy. So efficient and fast.
Carbon Cry writes in and says, with Zen 7 or Zen 8, do you expect to have 3D stacking as a full requirement, facilitated by BPD removing the issue of routing power up through the cache die? So what I will say is the vibe I get is there's always going to be some when I say always, I mean at least for the next few generations, I think is always going to be some version that is monolithic, that can be monolithic, doesn't require 3D stacking. Yeah. Maybe they want to put it in a Steam Deck or some cheap device. Like they're always going to have that, I think. But I wonder if you agree. Do you think Zen 8, Zen 9, do you think we're ever going to get to a point where like we have a Zen that requires 3D stacking, and then if you want the cheaper versions, it's just you have to buy a previous generation?
Yeah, it makes sense. And I mean, Carbon Cry, I think he talked about backside power delivery. Just for quick quick showcase. Like if you have like a chip, and currently you've manufactured a chip on the wafer, and then on top of the transistors, you have like the metal layers. And there's two basically two distinct parts of the metal layer. There's a metal layer that's doing all the interconnects, because all the cores, all the cache, everything has to talk with each other. That's not being done on the silicon level, that's being done on the metal layer. You have to interconnect the entire chip. And then you also have to bring power to the entire chip. And these are like these huge metal networks. And right now, they're still being placed on the same side. Like, you produce the transistors, and then on top of that, you stack all the metal layers. And then in the end, to connect the chip to the PCB, you flip the chip around. That's why it's called flip chip. You flip it around, and then you connect it with like C4 bumps to the PCB and wire everything out. And backside power delivery basically switches, like it switches things up. You still have the front side interconnects, where all the data routing is done, where all the interconnects are being built up. But then you flip the chip around and you build the power delivery on the backside of the chip. So you have, like, you divide the metal layer interconnects. You have the data connections on the front side and the power connections on the back side. And that's why the chip doesn't really have to be flipped anymore when it's placed on the PCB, because the power is coming from below. Now, there's one thing, because the chip has to talk to the outside. It's not backside power delivery only. There's also some data connections on the backside, but only a few, just to connect the chip to the PCB and outwards. All the internal connection, all the global, like the local interconnects on the chips, are still on the front side. And that's a really big step in chip design. It means you have more space on both sides for the metal interconnects. It makes it easier to produce the front side interconnect. It makes it easier to produce the power delivery, because you don't have to watch out for all the data connections, and you can have less layers and quicker and faster and better power delivery. And in the end, it's kind of a little bit confusing, but it also makes it easier to stack chips, because if you have both chips with separated data and power interconnects, you can just stack them on top of each other. You do have to route some power to the top chip, probably with TSVs, but it's a much simpler design. I think I would have to do a video about it. I mean, I did videos about backside power delivery, but for me, it's like always so difficult. I have to write down if I want to explain it in a way that people can understand it. I'm sure it was a little bit more rambling right now, but it makes things easier, and it makes things better, and it's a next generation chiplet, and it makes it an obvious choice.
Yeah. So, but you think even with all those extra costs, even if the floor goes even higher to what it costs to get a Zen 8, let's say, CPU, you think it would be worth it just because of the profound power, profound performance increases you're going to get, where they're like, yeah, we're sorry, Zen 8's really expensive, but we're going all 3D stacking here. Do you think there'd be some concerns, though, about supply constraints? I don't know. I mean, I know with Zen 7, they're planning to do it with some variants, but I guess maybe not all variants. So they'll have an option for servers if you don't want the 3D stacked one.
I mean, all the big foundries and packaging companies are building up their advanced packaging capacities right now. So by the time there is a Zen 7 with 3D cores, or whatever they will call it, there's probably going to be more than enough packaging capacity. This development also, in my eyes, makes it clearer why we already see this the cache chiplet going underneath with Zen 5. Because I always wondered, why would AMD introduce a new cache chiplet with Zen 5? Like with Zen 3 and Zen 4, the cache was on top. The 3D cache was on top of the CCD. And now with Zen 5, they flipped it around and the cache is below. And I wondered why. Yes, there are thermal advantages, but now you have to route all the power through the cache chiplet to the cores. And the cores need the majority of the power. So you have to route a lot more power to another level of silicon, which is more complex. It costs more. And I feel like the thermal advantages aren't that big. It would still be the fastest gaming CPU, even if you clocked like 100 or 200 megahertz lower. So, but I think that's a trial run for these 3D cores, because if you really have 3D cores where you separate the cache, the L3 cache, on a different die, and you have the cores on a different die, the cores do need to be above DL3 cache, because otherwise you would cover all the cores with like a big layer of cache, and that's really gonna hurt you in a thermal way. So I think Zen 5 X3D is just AMD trying things out 2 generations before it's actually gonna be used in a way that, like, when they want to use it.
Yeah, that's interesting. This idea that like it wasn't just for the obvious the obvious benefit of higher clocks with Zen 5. You think, no, this is all of these are their own little steps to the next thing. And you think this is a trial run for getting Zen 7 ready.
Yeah. It makes more sense to me now. Same with like Zen 2, they tried the first TSVs, and Zen 3 had it from the start, and they've waited like over a year to get it ready. And they're doing things step by step and learning on the way. And probably you have so much feedback from bringing a product like Zen 5 X3D to market and just mass produce it and see how's the foundry doing, how's the packaging doing, what's the biggest fault in the production line, what do we have to focus on, what do we have to improve. And if you want to have a core where this is the default, where basically you rely on chiplets and on hybrid bonding, that's how I would do it, step by step.
This piece of content is brought to you by the Minis Forum MSA2, a small yet very capable mini PC. It comes with a flagship 9955HX Zen 5 16-core processor, and despite its size, it also has a built-in PCIe x16 slot with support for a low-profile graphics card. And all of that means is that, yes, I mean, look, it has dual 10G SFP, dual 2.5G LAN, and support for 15 terabytes of U.2 storage, which makes it look like it's for professionals. But ultimately, if you look at the price of entry, this is a good way to get an incredibly compact, smaller than a console, yet powerful mini gaming PC as well. And so I really highly recommend it for people that are either professionals or gamers looking for a bargain on a smaller really than ITX desktop. And you know, it's high quality design too, with aviation grade precision design, and it is also, despite its size, fairly quiet. So if you are interested in this product, please check out the links and the offers below to get the best deal on the MSA2, and also make sure that you are showing support for Moore's Law's Dead. Again, clicking on that link helps the channel even if you don't buy it, but if you do buy it, you are also helping the channel even more. So support Moore's Law's Dead by checking out the Minis Forum MSA2 today. Chris Risch writes in and says, AMD and TSMC recently did a little press release saying that AMD will be the first to use TSMC's upcoming 2nm node. I think that's good news from this, and, you know, it confirms Tom's leaks and all. But do you think maybe this is too aggressive? Rumors about 2nm wafer prices and the fact that Apple wasn't the first to go to it suggests to me it's going to be really expensive. And I think that can make Zen 6, therefore, quite expensive at launch. Would you agree? And what are your thoughts on the trend for the latest silicon becoming more and more expensive? I have my own thoughts on this, but I want you to go first.
So obviously, silicon is becoming more expensive unless we hit like a new technology or unlock something new that's not ready yet. It's becoming more and more expensive. But there's a couple of things I think you have to consider. If you are a first adopter, and especially if you're like one of the biggest partner with TSMC, and yes, Apple is number one, but AMD also has a really long-standing close relationship with TSMC. TSMC is not going to throw you to the sharks. If you are basically used as a pipe cleaner, like they need someone to be the first to start mass produce in a new process node. And that's always like a difficult endeavor. There are always risks. And to some degree, I'm sure TSMC does offer some guarantees and some offsets because they're also gaining knowledge from that, which then they can use to get more customers for their process, which now has been validated because it's working. So I don't think it's as bad as you think when it comes to pricing. And every time I see numbers about like what a certain wafer costs, like $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 per wafer, I'm every time I hear about that, there's other people saying, well, that's not true at all. It's much lower. And there seems to be like this fight going on between people who say absurd numbers and people who say more conservative numbers. And in the end, the companies still make a lot of profit. I think that's what you can look at. Yes, TSMC is making more profit, not product. They're making more products, but also more profits. So definitely prices are going up, but AMD is also making more profit. Things are going to be more expensive, and if you have smaller dies, you can also put more on your wafer. And if you have a higher clock speeds, your chips perform better, and you can sell them for more money. So I don't really think that cost will be like a big factor for Zen 6. That's just my random thoughts. But I have no ideas on pricing. I'm not TSMC.
Yeah, I mean, my answer to this, and I think it's something I've said multiple times now in Broken Silicons, is like, will Zen 6 cost more to make than Zen 5? Yes, they're going to 2 nanometer. In fact, N2X on desktop from N4P for the core CCDs. The IO dies, I think, will probably be, at least on mobile, 3 nanometer. On desktop, they might have a cheaper 6 nanometer die. If that happens, though, I don't think the cost will be that much more, really. I mean, you're looking at like, I believe it was a 75 millimeter squared 2 nanometer die for Zen 6. So what is that? A die that small? Like, was it actually $10, maybe $20 compared to using 4 nanometer? And if the IO die costs about the same to make, I don't know. I don't think that's going to make the biggest difference. Compared to like a graphics card, they're still making way better profit margins. So like, they're making Nvidia margins on some of these CPUs, AMD is. And so I think eventually it could become a big deal. Like, I would worry about a fundamentally 3D core on the most advanced node in 2028 with Zen 7, all of these chiplets stacked, whatever. Sure. I would certainly worry that might be really expensive and actually eat into fundamentally what they can price these at for gamers. But for Zen 6, at least, come on, guys. It's 120 millimeter squared of 6 nanometer for the 9950X and 2, I believe, 69 millimeter squared CCDs on 4 nanometers. So we're looking at like 270 or something total. I mean, they're probably going to sell, I guess let's just use RDNA 4. They're selling a 356 millimeter squared, all 4 nanometer die. So we're talking about like 30% more silicon. More of the silicon is a cutting edge node with RDNA 4. And they're selling that for $600, same price as a 9950X.
And the memory on top.
Yeah,
and the
then
power
they have to add
delivery,
GDR6,
and
the
the
boards,
cooler.
and the coolers.
Yeah.
So, and I think they're probably making 20 to 40% margins, or maybe higher right now, but if it was at MSRP for the 9070 XT, so they're making double. And so will it go from maybe 100% margin on the 10950X? I don't know what they'll call it. Maybe we'll go from like 80 or 90% margins to 70, maybe. But if it costs more, it's mostly because Intel isn't competing at this point. I don't think it's because they're worried about that extra $20 it costs to make it. Don't you think?
Yeah, if there's a price increase, I think you could also look at the packaging, because for Zen 6, if it turns out that way, if they use a redistribution layer like an organic interposer and they use info instead of their really basic approach they use right now, where they're not using advanced packaging. So it could, in theory, add up new leading edge process node, new packaging, advanced packaging technology, could be more expensive. But like you said, CPUs are, it's just silicon right now on a really, really tiny PCB, and GPUs are so much larger. They have all these added bells and whistles. The power delivery alone probably in a high-end card can cost more than like a silicon on a CPU. If you think about it, if you have like beefy VRM system, and then you have it's the silicon and the memory, especially Nvidia with GDR7 right now, which like there's not that much supply. It's getting better, but that's major cost factor for the RTX 50 series. So if they can make GPUs work, they're gonna make CPUs work, and I don't think they will have a massive price increase. But I could be wrong, of course.
Another Chris writes in and says, "Hello, I have a question about CPU cache. If they keep increasing it, how much more do you think they can do until the gains get smaller to the point where they might want to consider stopping? Will they start doing more interesting things regarding how items are stored and moved through the cache?" Yes, stand by for the leak coming out later this week. Yes, they are doing interesting things in how they use the cache. But I will say a part of that leak that you saw, Max, without going into specifics because I'm not ready to, you can tell that they may have figured out where the limit is with Zen 6 already. And in Zen 7, it's more about how fast the cache is and how they use the cache, more so seemingly than adding 100 megabytes per core, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like we said before, there's like limited returns after a certain point. And especially, he talked about Zen 6, right? In the question. And the interesting thing right now with Zen 5, with the non-X3D version, you have like one CCD has 8 cores and 32 megabytes of cache. And then the X3D versions, like before, adds double the cache via X3D. So you have 64 megabytes of cache in the X3D chiplet. It doesn't matter if it's above or below, it's the same amount right now. And then you have the 32 megabytes of the CCD. So in total, that's like the 96 megabytes of 3DV cache, of L3 cache. And with Zen 5, if AMD is moving to a 12-core chiplet.
Zen 6, you mean?
Zen 6, sorry. Yeah, with Zen 6, if AMD, and if is pretty, like, it's pretty set in stone. It's pretty certain. So AMD is using to a 12-core CCD, and it seems like they're also increasing the L3 cache on the CCD. And it probably will be 48 megabytes instead of 32.
That, yeah.
So you have 50% more cores, but you also have 50% more L3 cache. And the 50% more cores probably won't do that much for gaming. They probably will have more
We'll
impact.
see. I think the fact that it's 12 cores that are unified for the first time ever. I mean, AMD, it has to go to a second chiplet. And Intel, they have to go to the E-cores. There are games that use, at a minimum, 12 threads. So being able to use 12 full cores without going to the second thread. I actually think in some games it might make a huge difference.
I mean,
there's long-term
games that make use of 16 cores already. So definitely there will be games. Maybe the better way to phrase it is, even if you have a game that only uses like 6 cores, and they will still have access to 48 megabytes of L3 cache,
right?
Which isn't quite 96 megabytes. So we're not there yet, but it's 50% more. And there's a decent chance that with Zen 6, maybe the X3D versions won't offer the same 15 to 20% uplift in gaming, because the L3 cache on the base variant is already that much beefier and offers more, like it's like a tiny X3D, like, because it's more cache. But
another thing I wonder too is like if they'll do a disabled 10-core model, and that will be the 10800 X3D, because you don't need more. Just the fact that it even gets 48 megabytes, or even what would that then be? 96 was 48. 144 megabytes of L3 cache alone is probably the bigger deal than going to 12 cores.
Yeah. 10 cores makes a lot of sense. Maybe we won't see 6 cores anymore. There's
I can't imagine they need to disable 12 to 6. How many quad cores do we see right now? None, right?
Yeah, the thing is, if the yields are okay and the die seems to be tiny again because of the move to such an advanced process node, I don't see them having to disable half the cores. At least not reliable in a way where you can say, well, we're going to use all these chiplets. There are going to be some for sure, but you won't have enough to basically use them to launch a new SKU, and you don't want to disable half the cores on a working product. So I think there's a good chance that with Zen 6, we will see 12 cores, 10 cores, and maybe 8 cores, and not below. That would be my guess.
The one thing I would say, though, is when I leaked like the lineup, there is 3-nanometer versions of Zen 6 for APUs. It wouldn't surprise me if there were like Bumblebee eventually. Of course, this is like a year or two after Zen 6 starts rolling out. But like the replacement of Mendocino, I believe, is too big. Okay, has 2 classic 2 C cores and 2 low power cores. It wouldn't surprise me if some of those were used as the 6 cores eventually on desktop. But yeah, I don't think we'll see 6 cores disabled
You
from
mean
flow.
like mobile chips that come to desktop?
Yeah, that may be like
Yeah.
our little
Yeah.
leak
Okay.
here. I think, and they're
Yeah.
3 nanometers, so maybe they're cheaper too. So maybe they could do that. But I
Okay.
agree. I don't think you're going to. I would suspect that whatever they call the 10600X will be 8 cores at least. That's what I
Okay.
think. And then
And
if it had 6, it'd be like the 500X 3 nanometer.
honestly, I hope they just go to 10,
Mm.
600, 10, 800. Like I really, I don't want to deal with like new names, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm really tripped up by Intel's new naming scheme. Even if it
That
didn't really
AMD
change that
copied.
much, it's not Core i9, it's Core Ultra 9 now, and I like going to smaller numbers. So in theory, like Core Ultra 9 285K, it's okay.
i7 285K would sound a lot better.
Yeah, but I feel like, yeah, because I mean, I'm getting old. Maybe it's like old man things. I cannot learn new tricks. But still trips me up.
Here's what I think they'll do. If they do end up using a 6 nanometer IO die for the desktop version of Zen 6, I've heard that version might not even have integrated graphics, or if it does, it doesn't have an NPU, or it's going to be significantly nerfed in AI performance compared to the mobile ones. That wouldn't surprise me then if they go to the 10 series, because it's still not AI, right? So, but if they do include a 50 tops or faster NPU, I think they're going to call that the oh God, I hope they don't do it, but
495 or whatever.
yeah, or what? Yeah, I guess 495, but then that would be like Medusa Halo. So they'll probably go to some naming scheme, or maybe it'd be like 480, and then 5 will be Medusa Halo. And they'll like, yeah, right, because maybe they'll make the 400 series desktop, 500 series mobile, like they kind of do leapfrogging already. But I hope they don't. But it kind of seems like that's what they're going to do.
But AMD's naming, I mean, look at the 9070 series. I actually have a 9070 XT right now in my system.
Me too. I'm using one right now in my system.
I wanted to buy a 5090. I wanted to. I actually tried really hard, and I couldn't get one. And then I was like, no, I'm not going to pay €3,500. Even if I'm a YouTuber, I'm not going to pay that much. And I'm actually pretty happy. I'm playing Jedi Survivor right now, and I held off for a long time, and now with all the patches out, and it's still a really buggy, stuttery mess. So, but that's
the
off
game.
topic. Yeah.
Well, you brought it up, so heck, let's just switch gears here. We wanted to talk about graphics cards eventually. We could talk about cache all day, I'm sure, me and you. So far, what do you think about RDNA 4 and Blackwell?
I'm really surprised by RDNA 4. Because I was a little bit conservative when it came to AMD's GPUs, especially after RDNA 3. And I'm positively surprised by RDNA 4. I think it's a really cool design. It's really, really dense. They have like over 150 million transistors per square millimeter, which is basically higher than what even TSMC said is possible for N4P. Which makes me wonder if maybe there's differences in how NVIDIA or AMD counts the transistors. But I think it should be comparable across TSMC nodes. So it's a really cool achievement. And I would say in general, if you disregard the fact that DLSS is still has a much wider availability and is still, especially the new transformer model DLS4, is still slightly ahead of FSR4. If you just look at the card itself, it's pretty much tied with NVIDIA's Blackwell architecture. If you consider die size and like the different performance levels, it definitely competes well with a 5070 Ti. Same amount of VRAM. It uses lower clocked GDDR6, which is also cheaper. And
it's impressive, right? They're hitting the same performance. I guess not quite the same die. Although, the 5070 Ti is cut down, but it's a larger die than RDNA 4. So they're kind of matching NVIDIA in die size, the die chosen. but with way cheaper memory and way less bandwidth. I think RDNA 4 is very impressive. I think they beat Nvidia this time in how impressive their architecture is.
Yeah, I think if you disregard like the small edge cases of path tracing, ray tracing performance is really great. It's still not one-to-one with Blackwell. Like the 5070 Ti is still faster in ray tracing, but it's not a generational difference anymore.
Mm-mm.
And there are many games where you can just enable ray tracing, which is especially impressive if you consider that AMD still does a lot of the ray tracing things on the shaders and not in dedicated hardware. Like BVH and these things they don't have like special hardware for that. So, and it's actually the first actual ray tracing uplift because RDNA 3 offered more RT cores because it offered more shader engines and more compute units. But the how many triangles and boxes it could do per clock didn't really change over RDNA 2. It was the same.
Phoenix, though, beats Rembrandt 12 compute unit to 12 compute unit. I think at least 10 or 20% in ray tracing, and Strix, even the 880M, so the 12 compute unit Strix, that one actually I think is like 25-30% faster than
they offered other
Phoenix.
improvements like in cache sizes and memory performance and all the other things. But if you look at at the specs on paper, RDNA 3 was more of a slightly more efficient and more ray tracing cores, and RDNA 4 is actually the first true upgrade to the ray tracing cores, where they like doubled
the fundamental upgrade.
Yeah, where they doubled the throughput. Yeah.
And well, okay, so join Patreon. I guess a free ad for the Moore's Law said Patreon. XTX999 writes in and says, "Is Nvidia blundering or is Radeon doing something impressive? They have a smaller die, drawing less power for identical performance to Nvidia. I gotta say, if they made a Navi 41 die, do you think they would have won the crown?" I think they could have.
I'm not sure if they could have beaten the 5090, but the 4090 for sure. And in my analysis, like I made a video about RDNA 4. Sadly, we don't really have high-res die shots, but AMD released some artistically changed, I think, like similar to what Apple did previously, like when they released like their images of their M series chips. And wait, let me catch my thought again. If you in my analysis, I was like looking at the chip itself, and I think the interesting thought is AMD could have achieved much more performance by not changing that much about the GPU, because usually you have to look at everything. Like you have to look at how many shader engines there are, because you need more compute units and you need more memory bandwidth and more memory to basically create a much better product. But RDNA 4, like Navi 48, has 4 shader engines. If AMD would switch to 6 shader engines, like if they would have released a GPU with 6 shader engines, like 50% more, they could have stayed with the same 256-bit memory interface, but just allow GDDR7 capabilities. And that would have doubled, no, not doubled, but increased the memory bandwidth by 50%. And by using 3 gigabit memory modules, they could have also doubled, no, not doubled.
They could have offered 24 gigabyte models.
So they could have increased the shader engines by 50% from 4 to 6 and keep the same memory setup by still offering 50% more memory bandwidth and 50% more VRAM, which would have been a card that's probably 40% faster in the end, because you probably need to lower the clock speeds a little bit and nothing scales 100%. But it would
maybe,
be like
I don't know, NVIDIA uses 600 watts. Maybe they could have just had the same clocks.
Yeah, but I wouldn't consider like a 100% scaling, like 50% more units, 50% more performance. But let's say 40% more performance, that would have been ahead of a 4090 for sure. And it wouldn't be 50% larger. The die would be more like 30% larger, because you only have to double the shader engines and maybe the L2 cache. And you don't.
So
really
they could have probably
touch.
charged like $999 or $1199 and had something faster than a 5080. And I was doing the math on the side too. You know, probably like 20% behind the 5090. But I don't think anyone needs 5090 performance. I think everyone's just kind of waiting for 4090 performance and for something with more than 16 gigabytes of RAM that does that. I think there's no doubt in my mind that a monolithic version could have easily beat the 4090. And I will say that crazy one that I leaked with like 13 chiplets, I think that would have beat the 5090. I do. Like their crazy MI300 looking one. It would have
Yeah.
been very expensive, but I mean, if they're already almost to 5080 performance with this, I think a chiplet version would have crushed the 5090.
It's kind of odd that AMD's like leapfrog generations, and the first RDNA was a massive success. It was a much improved architecture over Vega, which like I have a Vega here sitting.
The
It was
cursed
a much
Vega.
yeah, it was a much improved architecture. It had less transistors, less performance on paper, like less teraflops, and it performed better and was more efficient. And only problem in quotes, the only problem was that they only offered a mid-range card. They only attacked the RTX 2070 and not the 2080 and 2080 Ti.
Mm-hmm.
And they still forced Nvidia to release like the super refresh cards. And now with RDNA 4, they have an architecture that's again competitive, not only in performance but also in feature set. FSR 4 is amazing. Like I think it's actually a mix of an CNN and a transformer model. I think there are different parts in there. I think they already use some parts of a transformer model in there. RDNA 4 has dedicated tensor cores, which was really difficult to figure out because everyone is really hush hush. But George from Chips and Cheese was kind of able to figure it out because he could talk to some of them. And then I was pressing AMD and I was like, come on, I'm looking at the die shots and I'm looking at the documentation. Do you really have tensor cores? And then at some point, AMD sent me an official email like, we do have dedicated tensor core transistors. So they spend transistors on tensor cores. It's difficult. They're still part of the compute unit, like they're part of the SM with NVIDIA. Some people think it's like a dedicated core and you can use it at the same time as the shaders, which isn't even true for NVIDIA. Like for specific clock cycles, if you're using NVIDIA's tensor cores, you're not using the shaders in that specific SM subpartition. So there's different things going on, but AMD has tensor cores. They have much improved ray tracing performance. They have the new video engine or the new media engine, which encodes videos much better. I noticed it myself already. And all they needed to do was produce a high-end product. And it would have been competing against 4090, 5090 maybe even. But every generation, they don't do a high-end card.
Every other gem, pretty much, yeah.
Kind of sad.
Yeah, I the one thing I will say is this is the first time, and I said this many times in my RDNA 4 review that I did a week or two ago, and since then, over and over, is in my experience, I'm still using a 9070 XT. I've got my 4090 Supreme Liquid over there. I'm not rushed to put the 4090 in because the 9070 XT just has better drivers, and you have to wonder if AMD went for more core configs, would they have had the bandwidth to do this well and actually beat NVIDIA in drivers? And if that, and again, this is all who knows, who coulda, shoulda, woulda, alternative reality stuff. But if in that world where AMD beat the 4090 or even matched the 5090, they had drivers that were equal to NVIDIA, I would say that would have been a mistake because I think for their mind share moving forward, no one says NVIDIA has, well, I'm sure some people do on Reddit, but a lot of people now say AMD has drivers just as good or better than NVIDIA. And that was a huge mindshare win. They needed that for so long.
Yeah.
Red writes in, do you think Blackwell has some sort of hardware flaw? I saw recent reviews for Doom Dark Ages, and the 5080 loses to a 4080 Super constantly. It does not seem to be the only game. I find this weird for an architecture that kind of just seems like an add-a refresh.
With Blackwell, for me, it feels like everything besides the 5090 and basically TB202, everything else was like an afterthought. If you compare like generational, like 4080, 5080, and especially like the specific chips, they're basically the same size, use basically the same transistors, have very similar layouts and cache sizes and SM counts, and something interesting is going on. I cannot really put my finger on it, but there's something. I mean, we now know NVIDIA removed the 32-bit CUDA support, which people figured out because suddenly you cannot run the old physics games anymore. But there seems to be some other things in there, and I wouldn't have to look at the specific numbers, like go to Tech Power Up and just compare the chips generation to generation. But I think if you there's something strange going on. I cannot exactly tell you what. The 5090 GB202 is a massive improvement, really huge die, definitely made with an AI focus. If you look at the 512-bit interface and GDDR7, like almost 2 terabytes of bandwidth. That's clearly not for gaming. Maybe if you're a VR gamer or 8K gamer. But the other cards,
all those 8K gamers,
they're basically they're basically 4080 supers or Ada Lovelace supers. They changed some things, but that's like an architectural things. That's like it's a little bit over my head. GPU architecture that deep.
Yeah, I mean, were it to still use GDDR6, which maybe they should have actually, for most of their dies, I think you could get away with just saying, hey, look, from what I was told, Blackwell's node is like 5% to 10% better than the exact version of the node they used for Lovelace. And so at the same die size, even if it's 10% better, that's actually quite an accomplishment. But at the same time, yeah, but you have double the bandwidth for the 5090, and that doesn't really seem to be utilized. Even in AI, by the way, this was something that blew me away in early reviews that I looked into. Like, even in AI performance, a lot of people were saying this isn't the AI uplift I would have expected with how much more bandwidth and compute there is. So I think there's something wrong with Blackwell. To me, I think it's just a phoned in generation. They just wanted to get something out. They're ahead, and they wanted to do nothing that would rock the boat and make it so they might have delays, even though they did have delays anyways, which is funny. And I just think they made Lovelace bigger with a couple of tweaks, and that's why you can see the 5080 with the same die size as the 4080 Super.
Yeah, let's check.
Get like 15% faster, especially if you overclock it, like, or more. And you can see the 5060 Ti actually be like a solid 30% or more, I think, right, faster than the 4060 Ti, maybe 20% faster. So it seems to scale better down the stack, but I think the 5090 hit some scaling wall where it just doesn't scale unless they made a fundamentally new architecture.
Yeah, it's like I'm just looking at the numbers, and they're from Tech Power Up, so sometimes, most of the times, they're correct, and
they're close. They're usually within 10% or something.
And 8103, which is the die used, for example, for the 4080 or 4080 Super, has like 45.9 billion transistors and 379 square millimeters die size. So 45.9 billion transistors, 379 square millimeters. And GB203, the successor, has 45.6 billion transistors, which is like 300 million less, and 378 square millimeters. It's like 1 square millimeter less and 300 million transistors less. Now, I'm pretty sure at these high numbers, like 45 plus billions, a few 100 million transistors here and there are not really going to change anything. But something is weird, that's weird. You have these two GPUs, which are basically, it's like two versions of the same chip. Almost the same transistor count, almost the same die size. They're using the same process node. They didn't change anything about this. They did have to change something physically because it's a new GDDR7 memory controller and new memory PHYs and all of that, and PCI Express 5.0. And so there's changes in there, but it feels like they just fumbled something. I don't know. It's the same with the drivers, where like you couldn't use, like, the new Blackwell drivers were unstable on Ada Lovelace for a while, and they're still fixing things, and PCI Express disconnect problems. And one more thing, when I looked at RDNA 4, AMD implemented PCI Express 5.0, and the die is super close to the PCI Express slot. It's just super close because the higher bandwidth, you need more signal integrity, and you have problems with all the signaling. So AMD was like, let's put it as close to the PCI Express slot as possible. So we have the shortest way. And Nvidia, for their Founders Edition, was like, oh no, let's put our PCI Express 5.0 on a different board and connect it via ribbon cable. That's
Yeah, I'm
something
seeing
that,
that right now
yeah,
on
that's
in a
really
picture.
interesting. Why would you do that with like a new PCI Express 5.0 technology? That's counterintuitive, in my opinion.
Yeah, and they have a lot of PCIe Express issues, so maybe that's it right there. All
Yeah,
right.
yeah, definitely.
I'm on a time crunch, so we got to wrap this up pretty quick, but I want to ask one more question here that I think will be a fun one to end on. Join
Okay,
Patreon. XTX999 writes in again. I'm not reading this just because he's advertising the Patreon for me.
I'm
If
already paid
NVIDIA,
in.
AMD, and Intel respectively hired you for your input to win the next GPU generation, how would you do it? What individual advice would you give to each company?
So, first of all, real talk, if any of these companies would hire me for the next GPU, they probably lose big because I probably have all the wrong ideas.
You need to give yourself more credit, Max. I don't know. Have you seen some of these launches? I think maybe you'd give better advice sometimes than them, but go on.
So, if I'm NVIDIA, I think you have a really, really big card with lots of cores and lots of memory bandwidth. I would focus on a generation that tries to increase clock speed. Because I have a foundation, I have like this like thousands of cores, a lot of bandwidth, and I remember Pascal. I think it was Pascal, right?
Mm-hmm.
GTX 10 series. They just bumped up the clock speeds,
Kind
and
of
it was a
Maxwell, too.
massive.
Maxwell had
Yeah, yeah,
really fast
yeah,
clock speeds for
yeah,
28
yeah,
nanometer.
yeah. And I think it's time for another clock speed generation where you're like, of course, I want to see architectural improvements. Please bring back 32-bit CUDA. No, they won't, but just focus on clock speeds and just use a new node like N2. Don't skimp out on the process node for consumers and raise up performance through clocks. For AMD, be bolder. I think we can see that in their CPU department, like being first on N2, trying with your next leak, new core types, new chiplets, new advances. And I think you can see that AMD feels like they're ahead right now, that they're the dominating company when it comes to CPU cores. And they have to show that in GPU too. Don't cancel your Halo product. I mean, of course, if there's like technical reasons and you cannot do anything else, of course, sometimes you have to cancel the product, but just try to beat NVIDIA next generation, you know?
Yeah, because you've
I
gotten the
think,
mind share, right?
yeah, just try. And for Intel, honestly, I think we just have to wait and see. The next one is after Battle.Make is what is it called again?
Celestial,
Celestial.
which is at
And
least going into some APUs. We'll see how those
yeah,
pan out.
and I think on paper, Intel is actually on the right way. I mean, Alchemist, and like if you look at the IP, was a good architecture. The biggest problem was that Intel had these huge dies which competed with GPUs much smaller from Nvidia and
Half the
AMD.
size on older
And
nodes.
you see something similar with Battlemage, and it's like this area performance. And it's not only area; it's also transistors. Like they're spending a lot of transistors and a lot of area. They have to spend a lot more transistors and a lot more area to compete with AMD and Nvidia. And I think this is also in part of experience because it's their first. Like they did iGPUs for a long time, but it's a very different ballpark. And I think my advice to Intel would be don't give up. We need a third competitor in the GPU space, or it would be really nice. And Battlemage with the new drivers is actually getting better and better. And just do what you do, keep doing what you're doing, and don't give up. That's my advice to Intel.
So I'll go backwards.
Okay.
So I'll start with Intel. My advice would be they kind of already did it with Battlemage, though. I mean, I guess my advice would be, well, they didn't, though. They tried to, and who knows what will happen. There was some G31 die that eventually they either had to cancel or it might be professional only. I don't know. It's middle 2025 and it's not out. Stop making multiple dies. Make one die. Do it well, and cost optimize it for 400, not 300. You're losing money, and just do that one well. Probably next gen it would be a 16 gigabyte card if they made it that barely had 16 gigabytes and could make 10% profits at 400 or 350, maybe 350, and just do that. Stop trying to compete everywhere. Every time you try, you have to cancel half your products and it doesn't work. And just do that for the next 5 years, because no one's going to pay a lot of money for an Intel card, and you're going to go bankrupt if you try to make a huge lineup. Do that, and that's it. And if you can actually make it a tile that you can share with an APU, that way you're not losing anything if you make it. That would be cool as well, I think. For NVIDIA, pardon my language here, earmuffs for kids. NVIDIA, stop fucking around. Like, you keep doing this crazy shit where you're like 128 bits. It's a mid-range card. We have 16 gigabytes. It's time for another Pascal, in my opinion, not just in terms of clock speeds, but in RAM. The 6090 needs at least 32 gigabytes. Honestly, the 6080 should have 24, maybe even 32 or something gigabytes of RAM. You need more RAM. You need to stop screwing around. You need 16 gigabytes in the mid-range, 12 gigabytes, not for entry, 12 gigabytes for a $250 card, not a $300 or $400. And you need to just, again, stop screwing around. Stop milking and being greedy. You need a full, well thought out lineup that has double the VRAM of this generation. I mean, because you're running out of RAM. Now for AMD, I think I would just say the same thing. Go for it. If it means only 2 dies, whatever. Make a 128 compute unit one and a 64 compute unit one, and just rebrand old cards if you want to. But whatever you can do with good drivers, go for the high end this time, because I think people will buy it now.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Okay. Well, if it does sound good, then I think it sounds good if we stop there. I want to thank you for coming on once again, Max. Please tell everybody where they can find you.
Oh, you can find me on YouTube. High Yield. I'm pretty sure if you want to find me, you will find me.
Okay. And we'll have links in the description so people can easily find you as well. And then for everybody else, again, make sure you subscribe to the Moore's Law Said YouTube channel, ring the bell button, comment below, like below, join the Moore's Law Said Patreon. You can ask guests like Max questions. The next guest will actually be Wendell from Level 1 Techs this month. So if you join us, you'll be able to ask him questions. Yeah.
Much better guest.
No. Keep selling yourself short, Max. But and of course there will be a new die shrink coming out right after this for patrons as well. That one's interesting. It started as a mailbag and it turned into kind of a small side interview with developers about what's holding back graphics. And that's what we focus on in the die shrink. So again, lowest tier $2 a month gets you access to that in the Discord. And then otherwise, I think that's it. I've got to go. Max, I know it's late where you are. You've probably got to go.
I gotta go. 30 minutes to midnight.
All right. So again, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, everybody. And subscribe to Moore's Law Said on your podcast app of choice to give us downloads. We're part of a podcast network now, so those numbers going up would help too. But anyways, have a good week, everybody.
Thank you.
This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, it's not just me. Moore's Law is Dead is a team, with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, renders being done by the industrial designer Jean-Philippe Clermont, and special assistance is also provided by Carbon Cry and Carrie No Sugata as well. Find all of our information at www.mooreslawsdead.com on the About/Support page. In the event you do want to hire me for consulting work, hire Gerard for audio work, hire Jean-Philippe for industrial design work, or you're interested in working with Carbon Cry or Carrie No Sugata as well. You can also find our long-term sponsors on that page if you want to show them some love for putting food on our tables. Or you can also mail us some love. You can send letters or hardware donations to the following address: Moore's Law is Dead, P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. Although, to be honest, the best way to show Moore's Law is Dead some love is to support us on Patreon. Patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content truly possible. Every month, and really every day, depending on who you're talking about, me, Gerard, Dan, and Jean-Philippe are working tirelessly to provide a steady stream of content that we could not keep doing unless we knew the work was possible without being reliant on sponsors dictating every little thing we put out. Don't get us wrong, we love our sponsors, but we love directly working for you, our fans,
much more. If you have any extra money, even a couple free dollars a month, consider supporting us directly on Patreon. Those couple of monthly dollars will get you access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to ask guest questions, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who I am sure would love to meet you. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to early, ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the ability to ask questions in all Broken Silicon episodes and Loose Ends live streams ahead of the recording, and the entire back catalog of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, in addition to having thanks in the credits of videos and podcasts depending on the tier, with other perks available as well. And hey, if you cannot afford to support us directly every month, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family, and on social media and websites like Reddit, and give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast app of choice. All of this does really help us so much. But like I said, this podcast would not be possible without the patrons directly providing predictable and reliable support every month. And so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher supported levels:
Brad Medlin, Drita Full, Z Jits, Daniel D, Deke, Nicholas Buckner, Aaron Close, Jan Rounder, Daniel Hyde, MJB1, GZ Ziggy, Toka, SNAS Chalmers, Jam Theory Arrow, Velcome Alev, Jensen Wang, Tensor Core Enthusiast, Nvidia CEO, Gregory S. Hacker, Sarcastro, Chris Schick, Evan Dingle, Impressed AI Blocks, Hal Booma, Shredbird, Sammy Malas, Jordan Simkovic, The Boss Haas, Grizantine, Jonathan, Neithra Zink, Jake Dude 23, Jake Martin, Zlicky, Meat and Pork, Tim Robb, Ian Clifford, Gamers Unite, Travis Gooding, Mad, Zoot Suit Taylor, Greg, Michael McGee, Patty Cake, Stephen Coates, Amiable Chief, Mark Mitchell, Tommy, Aisha, James Anderson, Mark Raidmaker, Cole Addict, Cameron, Henry Zhang, Wesley Sager, Michelle Pell, Winwang, Hexapuma, Reginald Ari, Teak Autumn, Windstar, Corey Leonard, James I. Raider, Little Germany, Shay, Milton, Melodic Warrior, Brett Jones, Chuck Glidden, Mac Daffy, Stephen Dick, Justin Bustle, Austin Haggerty, Joe Foot, Brian Scanlon, Hardland, Jansen Angima, Joseph Kelly, Slushba, Him Sagung, Tails 2299, Brian Wright, Jeffrey Gentleman, Sisyphos 7771, The Forbidden Juice, RB Racer, Alex Vega, Dr. J Mad, Free D, Michael Cozy, John Swin, Crystal Joe, Elber Gun, Keekum, Solarized 80, Sprutnik, Brian Wright, Brian P, Hudat 42, Cornster 671, Penta Winta, Hal Richard, Omega Doge, Mr. Tiger, John Wick, Boomstick, State Farm Snack, Hugo, Ander Kiwi, Penguins Love AI, 37 by 73, Curry King 3, Nixus Mania, Porcelain Oats Rye, Hill Cheap Bowls, Sheriff Lotfi, Smash Axley, Kevin Coons, Kareem El Masri, Armand Vacatura, Jonathan Harris, Kylan Reichel, Angel of Cake, and of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.